Models of Early Childhood Education, Historical and Political Milestones. In the early 1800s, we start with single mothers going into the workforce, mostly as servants or domestic workers. Then we move to charitable organizations like churches, settlement houses, and care institutions where they create this opportunity for care for children to support lower income homes or lower income families. We have the first nursery school that opened called Victoria Day Nursery, established and opened their doors. With Victoria Nursery School, it is a nursery school that was opened in the 1850s. The idea of a nursery school, which has kind of come out of being common anymore, but a nursery school was essentially a program that you would bring a child to, and they'd only be there for a few hours before going home. This is probably where the Day Nurseries Act came from, because it was for childcare in the province, and they were considered day nurseries. So, nursery for where you would take care of babies and young children, but it was during the day for childcare, so they called it day nurseries, hence the Day Nurseries Act, which later changed, which we'll get to that piece, but this was Victoria Day Nursery. In the late 1800s, public nurseries started in Toronto. Their ratios were every three educators had 45 children. So that must mean they were all kind of working together as one program with 45 young children and 3 educators. The School Act came into effect in Ontario, which required the community to provide free common school that was compulsory for 7 to 12 years old. And it was only 4 months a year at that time. So this is where you get that established or that required school period for a certain age category. In 1882, there was the first kindergarten that was established in Ontario. We did talk about Froebel and him being the father, or considered the father of kindergarten. So the first one in Ontario was 1882. In the early 1900s, we have 1920, where there's care programs that were established in a variety of places across Canada: Montreal, Toronto, Halifax, Ottawa, Winnipeg, Vancouver, and other cities. So some of these actually allowed for infants, but these were care programs for children to go and interact in these areas. And during this time, these early childhood services, they were developed again by charitable groups and mainly women groups at the time. In 1935, Mothercraft was established. You may or may not be aware of Mothercraft. It is a recognized organization that operates childcare and early on facilities as well as early childhood programs. They are also recognized to teach early childhood education and be able to use those programs and those skills that you receive from those programs to then register with the College of ECE. So the College of ECE typically has a list of approved organizations or programs that can use their early childhood education courses and things like that to become a registered early childhood educator. And then we have in 1946 the Day Nurseries Act being proclaimed. At first, it was just limited to preschoolers, and then when years went on, it added school-age children, and as mentioned in our previous classes, the last major revision was in 1983, which was over 40 years ago, and then we'll look at when it was repealed for the Child Care and Early Years Act. So that was in effect for 68 years before 2015. In 1950, the National Education Association of Ontario was established. And in 1969, they changed their name to the Association of Early Childhood Educators. So you may be familiar with the Association of Early Childhood Educators and their advocacy for early childhood and for educators in early childhood across Ontario, and you do see that as an advocacy group, but the history is they started as the National Education Association of Ontario. In the late 1900s, so in 1984, about 40 years ago, the task force on childcare was set up by the Trudeau government. Not the current Trudeau government, it would have been the previous Trudeau government that they set up this task force. Because the years between the years of 1984 and 1995, there were 3 significant attempts to develop a national approach to childcare. As successive federal governments announced that a national strategy for childcare would be developed. So that's similar to now, where we're looking at, Canada-wide early learning and childcare program that offers up to $10 a day for childcare. So between 1984 and 1995, that 11-year period, there were several times, they're saying, 3 significant attempts to have this happen. So it's been a long time coming. So the three kind of pieces to that would be the task force that came in 1984. 1986, they had the special committee on childcare, and that was under the Mulroney government. And then John Chrétien had the Red Book Election Committee, and that was started by the federal government. So all of these were in attempts to have a national strategy for childcare. Each recognized that the social educational services, such as childcare, are areas of different areas of provincial jurisdiction. However, none of these efforts were actually successful, as you may know, because we're only seeing this Canada-wide early learning and childcare program now in the 2020s. Although, some efforts were made in the past for this type of initiative. And then in 1999, we have the first early years report, which was authored by Dr. Fraser Mustard, who has done some groundbreaking work in early childhood education and the benefits of it and the need for it in the early years sector. In the 2000s, the Council of Early Childhood Development was set up by Dr. Fraser Mustard, and his work, which we'll see in a moment, informed some of the changes that we now see in education and childcare. In 2007, the Early Childhood Educators Act was passed, and that's where the College of ECE, or the College of Early Childhood Educators, was established. Early Learning for Every Child Today, or ELECT, was developed. It was revised in 2013 as excerpts from ELECT. And then the Earlier Study 2 was published by the Honorable Margaret McCain, Dr. Stuart Shankard, which you might be familiar with for his work on self-regulation, to say it the least, and Dr. Fraser Mustard again. In 2009, with Our Bright Futures in mind, this report was sent to the Premier of Ontario at the time by Dr. Charles Pascal. Again, he acknowledged Dr. Fraser Mustard's work in early childhood education. And Charles Pascal is a person of significance as well to the field of early childhood education. This report was foundational in a lot of the changes we see in our sector right now, because it was the first step before getting right to the kindergarten program, formerly known as full day kindergarten, to getting to the Child Care and Early Years Act because of all the research and studies that were included in there. So it is of significance to where we are today, which is why we have looked at the history and philosophy and the different ideas that come from philosophy, and us digging deeper and understanding how those different ideas actually inform practices or things that you now see in the sector. For the 2010s, we have Modernizing Childcare, which we looked at last week as the discussion paper. We have Think Feel Act. This is a provincial document as well that really had educators digging deeper and thinking about the environment as a third teacher, thinking about self-regulation, thinking about having meaningful relationships with children. And then we had excerpts from ELECT. So these documents, so the Modernizing of Childcare in Ontario discussion paper, this was created before we had all the changes in the Child Care and Early Years Act, which was proclaimed in 2015, which means that the Day Nurseries Act was repealed or removed or taken out of law in 2015. But before that act was granted royal assent, which was in 2014, proclaimed in 2015, we had these discussion papers, we had Think Feel Act, we had excerpts from ELECT, because ELECT was very much still that document that was being used within programs. And then in 2014, when the Child Care and Early Years Act received royal assent, meaning it went through all the stages of review for law going into an act, and became what was going to be our next law in childcare. This is where all that information informed the Child Care and Early Years Act, that modernization, the history, the research for childcare really informed the Child Care and Early Years Act where it is today. And that's why there are significant progressive and evolutionary changes from the Child Care and Early Years Act, from the Day Nurseries Act to the Child Care and Early Years Act, and then having How Does Learning Happen? And How Does Learning Happen being that evolutionary document from ELECT as well, where it was a discussion piece, a question, as we've talked about before, and How Does Learning Happen being that document which is now the minister's policy statement, and being able to add that type of requirement into the Child Care and Early Years Act. So How Does Learning Happen is a resource for educators and licensed childcare programs in Ontario. It is not a law. However, making it the minister's policy statement makes it that document that is used for pedagogy in Ontario. 2015, the Day Nurseries Act was repealed in order to bring the Child Care and Early Years Act, or the CCEYA, into law. And then in 2016, FDK was provided to all families in Ontario. So that's full day kindergarten, and it was renamed, or is now referred to as, the kindergarten program after it was fully implemented. In 2017, the College of Early Childhood Educators released and published their Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice, which really outlines, what is expected of the educators, us educators, what is expected of us in programs, what's expected of us in the community, how we conduct ourselves, and really holds the profession to a high standard. And that is what is outlined in the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice. It does have, as with the kindergarten program, it does have some underlying feelings or underlying connections to what you would see even in How Does Learning Happen, in the sense where the information about belonging or well-being, these sort of concepts are continued in these documents. And with the full day kindergarten, you will see parallels with How Does Learning Happen and the full the kindergarten program document that they use, initially in 2016 but was updated in 2019. So in 2021, during the height of the health restrictions in Ontario, the Building on How Does Learning Happen document was published, and it had considerations to how we interact with children and how we ensure that we're still providing the need for care and the need for quality and the need for meaningful experiences and interactions, even during the period of health restrictions, with several additional guidelines on top of the Child Care and Early Years Act and several additional guidelines from public health over and above what public health already requires for licensed childcare in Ontario. In 2022, the Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Program, or CWELC, was introduced. And this is kind of what we were talking about. If you think about it, all the way in 1984, between 1984 and 1995, where they were trying to get this done as well. So that is almost 38 years, almost a full 40 years before we got to this point. Things to consider is we came out of a period of significant health restrictions where family, like you couldn't go to childcare for one period. For the first time in history, childcare was closed for 3 months of 2020. So in that case, they realized that families couldn't work. Because they would have been required to put their children in childcare. There were no schools operating during this time. And it really put kind of a light on the fact that childcare is essential, not only for the children's well-being and growth. Childcare is essential to the economy and essential to the workforce as well as school. Essential to the workforce and and the economy, so that people can go out and work and know that their children are safe, being cared for, and being educated. So that, I think, highlighted, or was kind of a highlight during that period of health restrictions, because then we now have the Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Program, realizing that, childcare is essential and affordable childcare is necessary and just benefits society as a whole. So with the childcare, early learning and childcare, Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Program, CWELC, there are a lot of different milestones that happen throughout the last couple years. So in the beginning, or April of 2022, they released these guidelines to kind of give everybody an idea of what this program would look like. By May, they started giving money to the different municipalities to support the implementation of this program. By summer of 2022, they began to enroll programs into they began to enroll, I would say, licensees or child care centers into this program, because you weren't just automatically entered into this program. You actually had to apply and be accepted, which is still the case. You have to apply with your municipality. So Toronto, Peel, Halton, York, you have to apply with your municipality. And they have their own, federal criteria and municipal criteria as to, what will be, what they're going to accept. And then you would be accepted, and then you start into the program. Initially, when you started into the program, you had to basically agree to reduce your fees by 25%, and give families that refund back, that 25%. By fall of 2022, 92% of childcare sites said that they wanted to join the CWELC system. And by December, they released more guidelines as to how to use it. And they really intended to create, and their intent is to create more spaces. So 8,600 new childcare spaces by December 31st, 2026. Also in December, they announced a $213 million startup grant to ensure that we have affordable childcare. So now we're seeing them putting a lot of money into childcare, a lot of money into the early years sector, because of the benefit that, we kind of knew is now being highlighted as something that now the government is on board with. The government does also, have fee, like childcare fee assistance. They do also provide wage enhancements outside of CWELC, but this was over and above all of that being added to the childcare sector. Winter of 2023, they just released more reports, and by June of 2023, and they had 92% of the childcare programs, I guess, who said they intended to be in it, were enrolled in the CWELC system. And they continue to add more wage enhancements. They continue to add more supports for retaining qualified staff. As we know, the workforce changed during our period of health restrictions, so less people were out in different places, so some staffing constraints began as we entered 2022 and 2023. Some of them still linger, so there's an added effort to ensure that staffing is maintained and that wages are supported in that case. And as we continue through CWELC, programs have to continue to reduce their fees to get to that approximate $10 a day per child. And right now, the next fee reduction will require that, all programs have a set fee, and they can't deviate from that fee if they're within the CWELC system. So that's pretty large, a lot of significant and big changes in terms of the sector for finances and fees for families happened between 2022 and now. So this is kind of where we are in terms of the program that has been created for childcare. The best teachers are those who show you where to look but don't tell you what to see. We're going to move into some of the models of early childhood education, and a lot of these quotes make you pause and think and consider what this means to yourself as an educator. What does this mean to your personal philosophy? What does this mean from your perspective? We start with emergent curriculum, and the term emergent would be used to describe this program. It is rooted in the work by different theorists like John Dewey, Jean Piaget, Lev Vygotsky, and it really defines a process where teachers plan activities and projects, but they're based on the child's interest. It's based on what that group wants to work on, what they are working on. It takes into account their age, development, needs, and interest. In an emergent curriculum program, they watch children and they work side by side with them in the classroom, and they provide different opportunities for the children throughout the program. This type of curriculum, it allows for personalized and meaningful learning experiences, and the children can develop critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, because they are being asked questions or given information or given materials where they can gather information as well. For a big part of this curriculum is not only the play-based aspect, but also the inquiry-based learning. So they get to ask questions. The teacher encourages them to ask questions, encourages them to problem solve, and they're also can ask to help find answers and provide solutions and be curious and think outside the box. It also helps the teacher to encourage children to investigate and figure things out. It was developed in this concept, or this way of learning was developed in the 1960s, and this methodology encouraged it wants you to have an open dialogue with the teachers and children, and really promotes that child-directed interaction within the program. So based on John Dewey's philosophy, believing that education begins with the curiosity of the learner, when you have this inquiry-based concept or opportunity in the classroom, it really puts that learning and the intent for that learning on the student, on the child. They get to pick and understand and dig into different concepts based on their curiosity and the learning in their environment. The role of the educator in this case is different from a traditional role. In a traditional curriculum, the teacher or educator acts like the source of that knowledge. They're the primary source of knowledge. They give the students knowledge. They give the children knowledge. It's very teacher directed, pre-planned, pre-cut shapes, different things like that, themes and things that the teacher maybe wants to see. In the emergent curriculum, the teacher takes the role of that facilitator. They're observing, they're checking children's interest, they're writing things down, they're providing resources and guidance, and then they're engaging children by asking questions and expanding their learning. So as a successful emergent curriculum, the teacher would be thoughtful about their planning. It would be very child-centered and child-directed. There would be learning activities that are planned based on the children's interests. The topics would be based on interest and, kind of evolve into, bigger projects based on one initial interest. And that's where the teacher uses their skills and their knowledge to think, okay, if the children are interested in A, how do we, find all the components of that said topic so that we're interesting them in books, or maybe a field trip, or maybe collecting or gathering something, maybe bringing things from home. So really trying to expand the children's learning based on their interest, because then you already have their input and their buy-in for that topic. And then the teacher can use this observation to plan for more experiences with the children. And the practice of this would also help them to be reflective and really take time to reflect in and reflect on the observations they're seeing with children. An example of an emergent curriculum program would be with the University of Toronto. They do have several locations that offer an emergent curriculum. One of the locations is ECE, and that is a location that offers this curriculum model to children.